Thank you so much for joining us for KVUE News at 6 on KVUE Plus. I'm Quita Culpepper.
And I'm Mark Mullins.
State regulators have told Camp Mystic, the Kerr County camp where 27 girls were killed in last summer's flood, it is not in compliance with state health and safety rules.
And after reviewing the camp emergency plan, the state says the camp needs to make changes or it may not receive a license to reopen this summer. KVUE's Daniel Perot joining us here in studio. So Daniel, what kind of issues did state regulators find in this?
State regulators highlighted 22 categories where the camp's emergency plans were either insufficient, incomplete, or missing. Among them is the camp's flash flood warning evacuation plan. The camp now has 45 days to address those issues, then resubmit the plans to the state health agency. It comes as state lawmakers are preparing for public hearings on what happened at Camp Mystic last summer at the Capitol. Days after they toured the buildings and fields of Camp Mystic, the Texas House and Senate General Investigative Committee on the July flooding is set to take its search for answers back to Austin with 2 days of hearings that are expected to include testimony from Camp Mystic leaders.
They're really trying to find out what happened, what went wrong, and how can we make sure it doesn't happen again.
Their investigation into the camp's response to flooding is separate from the one by the Texas Rangers.
The legislature is about finding information and then pushing that forward for the next legislative session.
State Senator Jose Menendez says the committee has a narrow focus on Camp Mystic as the camp asked the state to give it a license to reopen its Cypress Lake location, which is not where the deadly flooding happened.
It's limited to that, to the actions that occurred, I think, because of the fact that these children were entrusted to these people. This was a business meant to house and keep children safe.
Last week, members of the Eastland family, which owns Camp Mystic, testified they did not see weather warnings, and there was little they could have done because the flooding happened so quickly.
We did not expect what was going to happen, no sir.
Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick and families like the parents of Seal Stewart, who's still missing after the July 4th flood, say the state should not give Camp Mystic a license.
Because it is so clear that they are incapable of keeping children safe.
In an op-ed in the Austin American-Statesman, O'Kelly and Paul Little, who plan to send their daughter back to Camp Mystic this summer, say licensing is not a moral referendum, and if the camp meets the requirements, it should get the license. Writing, "We trust Camp Mystic and the Eastlands. Even in the shadow of tragedy, we remain committed to truth, fairness, and the law."
If the camp was doing what the state said, it's the fault of the state for not having stricter standards.
State lawmakers will hold hearings on Camp Mystic on Monday and Tuesday at the Texas Capitol. Meantime, the Texas Rangers continue to investigate the deadly flooding at Camp Mystic. They were on the campgrounds as part of their investigation yesterday. In the studio, Daniel Perot, KVUE News.